your presentation so we can check if everything works for you and visible for us.
Okay.
Hello, Mr. Hayes.
Hey, hi there.
Hello, Olga.
Yeah.
Hello.
Здравствуйте, мистер Хейс. Здравствуйте, Ольга.
Очень рады видеть вас.
We are very glad to see you.
Наши участники подходят, и мы будем очень рады услышать от вас вашу историю, ваш рассказ. Это историческое событие, и сегодня, если вы с нами поделитесь этим, мы все будем очень-очень рады.
So more and more people are coming to this room, and we are looking forward to your talk you are going to give to us, because what you participated in was something unique, was of historical importance, and we are really looking forward to hearing your presentation.
All right. I'm here in my office, one room at my home. And you can see a lot of pictures on the wall. Those are not space pictures. Those are family.
Вот, ну, я сейчас нахожусь в своем домашнем офисе, вы видите здесь много всяких фотографий на стенах. Это не космические фотографии, это, в общем-то, связано с семьей.
Наша сегодняшняя встреча, я думаю, что пройдет в формате вопросов и ответов, но прежде чем мы начнем ее в таком формате, мы бы просили вас сказать немножко о себе, о своем пути, что привело и как привело вас, привел ваш путь в полет.
So at one point we'll definitely transition to questions and answers, but for the beginning we would really like you to tell us about your way which brought you to Apollo at one point.
Okay. Yep. That'd be good.
Хорошо.
Итак, начнем?
And I believe we should start.
Мистер Хейс, мы вам слово предоставляем и начинаем встречу.
Mr. Hayes, we are ready to start, and we are giving the floor over to you, and we are starting our meeting.
Okay. You say I'm okay to start introduction now?
То есть можно начинать представляться.
Yes.
Yes, sir.
Yes.
Okay. I'm sorry to not see the group in Rice University this year. I've been spoken many years before, and they could enjoy the very hot Houston weather we're having here, which is up close to 100 degrees or Fahrenheit.
Но вот, к сожалению, в этом году я не выступал перед группой в университете Райса. Очень люблю это делать. Сейчас у нас в Хьюстоне очень жарко, порядка 100 градусов по Фаренгейту.
Now, is the audience in place now that I can start?
То есть можно начинать.
Yes. Да.
Okay. All right. Well, my name is Fred Haise, and I guess best known for my days as an Apollo astronaut. And in particular, a lot of people want to know about Apollo 13. It was to the third lunar mission that was to have a landing on the moon, which unfortunately we did not accomplish due to an explosion of an oxygen tank on the way to the moon, which resulted in quite a bit of workarounds, challenge for mission control and other people that were called to consult to figure out alternate means of handling things to get us back home. Before I started that, I thought I'd back up a little bit. For education, I think many of I'm speaking to, I assume, are in university and studying to be possibly engineering, which was my major. I have started after a military career of 2 Marine fighter squadrons during the Korean War. I went back to school to get an engineering degree, aeronautical engineering degree, at a university here in the United States. Today, that's called aerospace engineering at most universities here in the United States. From there, I went on to apply where there was an opening to join NASA, which had just become NASA only for 1 year when I was recruited and signed up to be a research pilot at the Lewis Research Center, one of NASA's centers around the country, as a test pilot. And I was there 3.5 years in a test programs. In fact, one I was with one other test pilot. We started a zero-G program, which was the second one rather, done in the United States. The first one was by the Air Force aeromedical group, who in a 2-engine propeller transport airplane were taking up and free-floating subjects, people, testing for the effects of zero gravity. Whereas our mission with our AJ-2 type of aircraft was to test fluid systems using the payload bay of that aircraft to float various experiments around. After 4.5 years, I moved on to NASA's Flight Research Center, now named Armstrong after Neil Armstrong, at Edwards Air Force Base in California, which was NASA's premier flight test facility at the time, flying the X-15 rocket ship. That program was going on at the time I was there. Unfortunately, I never got to fly it. But at any rate, I spent another 4.5 years, almost 4.5 years, at Edwards Air Force Base with NASA. Again, more doing test flying with various research programs, although I did fly a number of flights that were supporting the X-15 flights and launches, as a chase pilot, flying the weather flights in the morning, or checking the upstairs range lake beds where it might, in an emergency, have to land to verify they were safe. So that sort of thing. So I was there, and somewhat dubious about joining the astronaut program. They had by that time they had 3 selections. Obviously, the original 7 astronauts. There was a second group, and then they had just completed a third group about a year before, and it announced there would be another astronaut selection. It so happened that Neil Armstrong, in his background, he was also a NASA research pilot or test pilot. In fact, he started the same as I did at Lewis Research Center in Ohio, and then he had gone to Edwards Air Force Base for NASA's Flight Research Center. And luckily, he did get to fly the X-15 before he went into the astronaut program. And he came back and visited at one point, and I and another pilot cornered Neil and asked him, what's it like to be an astronaut? And he said, well, you sit in a lot of meetings, you sit in a simulator a lot, and he said, there's not much good flying. And of course, he was expressing the experience that he had at where I was at the time at Flight Research Center, where literally almost every day I flew aircraft, or every other day, and sometimes twice a day, and involved in several test programs at the same time, either as a primary pilot or as a subject pilot in other programs. So I had to think hard about leaving that, because that was really good flying. In fact, over my whole career, that was the best experience I had flying aircraft, was those days. But I finally decided, I was junior in the office, that and so the selection of people to fly the X-15 in our pilot's office was more by how the seniority. and I was pretty low in the office. In fact, I was at the bottom, and I knew I would probably never get to fly the X-15, which I would have liked to have done. So I applied and was accepted to join the astronaut program in 1966 in a group of 19. I went through preliminary training for almost a year. They actually cut our training short because they needed help in getting the missions ready, and we were assigned like a support crew to the people who were really astronauts who were going to fly the mission. And during that time, I spent 14 months at a plant for a company, Grumman, who were building the lunar module, the vehicle that was going to land on the moon. And I spent time in the factory over 14 months doing the early testing of those vehicles that had been manufactured to get them ready to ship to Kennedy Space Center, where they would be launched. So I was away from the office quite a bit, but at the end of that period, I did get a call from Deke Slayton, one of the Apollo 7 astronauts, original astronauts, and got my first crew assignment. I was assigned as the backup lunar module pilot on Apollo 8, which turned out to be was our first mission that a flight went to the moon. That was in December of '68, around Christmas time. Followed that up with another backup assignment. I was a second backup assignment on Apollo 11, where I backed up Buzz Aldrin, who was on the prime crew, and he and that crew eventually made the first actual landing on the moon on Apollo 11 in July. In fact, I'll attend an anniversary celebration in a couple of weeks on the we have every year based on that flight landing date in July. So my first real opportunity was assignment, frankly, as the backup lunar module pilot for Apollo 14. But because of circumstances of that crew that had been named for 13, not having two of them had never served a backup assignment, the decision was made to give them more training time, and our Apollo 14 crew was moved backwards to fly Apollo 13. Otherwise, if it had stayed with the normal rotation, I would have flown Apollo 14 rather than 13. So that's how I got to that point, to what I thought was going to be my great opportunity to go to the moon on that mission and actually land on the moon with Jim Lovell, while Jack Schweigert would stay in lunar orbit in the mothership. Of course, were unusual circumstance with the loss of the explosion and the loss of one oxygen tank that somehow also started a slow leak in the second tank. And that made things more serious because the vehicles, the command and service module, its primary electric power was by fuel cells, which depended on oxygen and hydrogen to provide us electric power. Our only other electric power in the capsule were three small batteries. They were called entry batteries because that was their purpose, to help us operate the capsule through the entry phase, a very short time to get through to the point where we could open all the chutes, the drogue chute and then the main chutes for a splashdown at the end of the mission. So virtually with the fuel cells shut off, without the loss of the oxygen supply, we had no power in the command module and had to shut it completely down, which had never been done before. So a very unusual circumstance to deal with, which involved the use of this landing craft, which was only normally planned to be turned on and operate to support the landing and rendezvous back up to a rendezvous within 2 days. So where we were in our path heading to the moon, out about 200,000 miles, not yet to the moon, we were facing a period of 4 days till we would be back to enter the Earth. And so this 2-day vehicle, the first thing that had to be figured out was how to make it last 4 days, which was done by a very severe power down to a very low power source of a 12 amp virtually, whereas the normal operating power during landing was up around 60 amps, and in coasting flight without all the radars on and everything was still about 35 amps. So we were well below normal operating conditions, and the vehicle was not equipped with the amount of thermal blankets, insulation, if you will. So it got very cold. In fact, the dead turned off mothership, the capsule, the water tanks froze. It got below freezing, below 0 centigrade. And in fact, when the capsule was recovered after splashdown and brought on board the ship and inspected, the tanks were found still frozen, even after entry. The lunar module, I don't think got down to freezing because it ended up all 3 of us stayed in that landing craft, so we had body warmth. And we had the warmth of the little bit of the electronics equipment and pumps and things we were running for environmental life support. And obviously have communication with the ground for that period. So I would guess in the lunar module, we were probably something between 5 and 10 degrees centigrade. Very cold. We put on any spare clothing we had, on underwear primarily. I had on 3 sets of underwear. We did not have jackets. Many people wonder why didn't we put on our spacesuits. Well, the spacesuits get hot if you don't have cooling flow, airflow. And because of the situation, we only had 1 set of hoses available to hook up because the other, for the second crewman, there were only 2 normally in the landing craft. The second set was tied up with a workaround box to use a different shaped lithium hydroxide cartridge from the mothership to cleanse the air of carbon dioxide that was building up. There was a shortage of that commodity in the landing craft. In fact, the only spare we had was actually on the descent stage that we could not recover. Normally it would be recovered after we went out on the moon the first time. We'd pick that up to bring back into the cabin before the second time we would have gone out. So we didn't have near enough of the supply on board to cleanse the air in the lunar module. So the command module cartridges, which were different size and shape, had to be improvised and tied up the other set of hoses. Otherwise, if you put on a suit without cooling, you would perspire and actually get hot, even with the temperature we were at. So Jim Lovell, the commander, mutually decided that we would basically all suffer equally, that no one would get in the suit and be cooled. So that's the way we went through the next 4 days. Miraculously, we powered when we got ready to power the spacecraft back up, which had to be done very late before entry. Jack Schweiger and I were to do that power up while Jim stayed in the landing craft to maintain vehicle attitude, communication. While we did that, we got the procedure they had to invent, create, because there was no procedure to power up the command module. It was never supposed to be powered down. So that was worked by Mission Control and other supporting engineers to develop that procedure. And it was first passed up to us 17 hours before we were going to enter. So Jack Schweiger and I had that 17 hours to look it over, to rehearse it mentally, talk our way through it, to get an idea of the flow of the activation procedure of the capsule. And then we're only allowed to go into the capsule and actually start the activation 2.5 hours before we were going to hit the air. They did not want us powering it up too soon. We would be taking away energy and reducing the power in those 3 small entry batteries. So it kind of pushed us into a corner to get through that power up. We went aboard the capsule about 3 hours before entry in a dark vehicle, no lights, with flashlights. The instrument panel was covered with water from the moisture because it had not been operating without a water separator. And so we got out towels and wiped off the panel, and then followed the activation checklist. Surprisingly, and remarkably, and thankfully, there were no errors in the procedure. So in fact, as we started to power up, sometimes in some parts of that, a warning light would come on, which normally would make you stop to investigate why the light was on. Well, they had earmarked that in the procedure, that was a normal thing, so it didn't slow us down. And we got the capsule powered up. And as you imagine, that vehicle had been frozen, water tanks frozen. So the avionics had obviously exceeded their normal specifications or operating limits, being frozen now for 4 days, being shut down. But the vehicle came back to life. Jack Swyatt was flying it through the entry and set it up and set it under computer control. And the entry was essentially quite normal. We had a little rain shower at the top end of entry as we hit the G's, the first G level build up, where water fell out from behind the panel. But we ended up having, as best they could measure, our splashdown from the ship's location. For the overall program, we had the second most accurate splashdown of the program, which is kind of a small miracle that all that equipment had come back to life and had performed so well. From a career standpoint, I actually was interested in getting eventually into program management, knowing that someday I'd be too old to fly. And I was hoping to stay in the business of close to the business. And if I couldn't fly, be in a program management where I would be involved in the development of the new vehicles that others would fly. And moved from the astronaut office for 4.5 years to the orbiter project office, where I would be involved more in program management to get the very first orbiter, Enterprise, was named Enterprise after the Star Trek group, to get it ready then for flight, which we would fly in what was called a landing test program, where we were going to use a Carrier 747 aircraft, where it would be mounted on top, and to take it to altitude to be released for test flights, gliding test flights, to land on the lake bed at Edwards Air Force Base. Now, what I consider kind of the highlight of my career was when I was named after that 4 years in the orbiter office to be the commander of crew 1 of 2 crews that would get to fly Enterprise. Myself and Gordon Fullerton, who was an Air Force colonel at the time. And the second crew was Joe Engel, who had flown the X-15. That was an Air Force pilot, test pilot. And his companion would be Dick Truly. Dick was a naval aviator and test pilot who later actually became the head of NASA for a period of time. And so we were slated to fly a test program that was comprised of 8 test flights. 3 of them we would stay on top of the 747, which could get us up to about 25 to a little over 1,000 feet altitude, while we tested systems on the Enterprise, and also perfected the maneuver, which would be a slight diving maneuver, very shallow, by the 747 to get us to a speed where we knew we could safely separate. We then followed that up with 5 flights where we separated the orbiter for, again, glide flights to land on the big dry lake at Edwards Test Base in California. I got to command 5 of the 8 test flights. The only other part I'll talk about career-wise was in 1979, I left NASA. I was slated to fly the 3rd orbital flight, which I look forward to. It would be a lot of firsts. As a test pilot, you like to do first flights, our first experience. And our flight, I would have flown with Jack Lausma, would have gone up to rescue Skylab. Skylab was the first space station, if you will, that we had, and had been left in orbit after 3 crews visited it in the mid-1970s. And it was falling in, threatened to fall in. And the flight we had scheduled then to the mission was to go up and rendezvous with it with the use of a small kick stage, a booster, that would be in the payload bay of our orbiter. Jack Lausma was going to manually fly that booster over and dock it with Skylab. And then people on the ground would ignite the booster, either posigrade or retrograde, to either boost it higher, which I thought was the normal plan, or if that was not possible, to retrograde, to have it enter safely in the Pacific Ocean somewhere. Well, unfortunately, sunspot activity, as well as scheduled delays of launch of shuttle, cancel that mission because Skylab fell in with some control, but limited control, before we could get to the point of flying that mission. So I elected at that time, I had an opportunity to join Grumman Corporation in New York, which was Grumman's primary mission was design and development of aircraft. Other than its space program, one that had an OAS satellite program that flew, and of course developing the landing craft for the lunar mission, lunar module, that did 6 landings on the moon. So I joined Grumman Corporation as vice president of space programs, and had a 17-year career in the business world, where ultimately with Grumman, after 4 years, I got into the creation of a company, a service company, subsidiary company for Grumman in service business, and developed that company. And we eventually merged with another major company, Northrop Corporation, which is another aircraft company in California. And in that merger, I inherited their subsidiary service company. And so finishing my career after 17 years, I was running 2 companies, one for Grumman and one for Northrop, as a result of the merger. So that pretty much completed my full-time work life in the aerospace business, which ended up counting my time in the military in 20 years in NASA and the time 17 years in aerospace had been 42 years in the business of airplanes and space, which I look back on was a very great, rewarding career. So at this point, maybe I would turn it over for any questions that the audience may have.
Включайте кнопку.
Могу я задать вопрос, но на русском языке, потому что... Отлично. Из речи я понял, что вы так и не были на орбитальной станции Skylab, и меня интересует вот что. В порядке нашей работы мы разрабатываем один проект, и меня заинтересовал такой элемент.
All right, I'm afraid I'm going to need an interpretation. My Russian is not very good.
The question wasn't finished.
What's that?
So, yeah, so he started, but it seems like we lost it. Okay.
So thank you very much for the presentation. It was very interesting to hear it. And you mentioned your involvement with Skylab space station. And we are currently developing a project involving a design of the human spacecraft. And in that respect, I would like to ask you a question about the shower facility on Skylab. Were you able to see that, how it looked, how it operated, and what is your opinion about this kind of device?
Okay, what is my opinion about Skylab?
About the shower facility on Skylab.
Oh, the shower facility. Well, as I said, the only connection I had with the Skylab program was that one potential shuttle mission to do a rendezvous and hopefully rescue it to put it higher in space because it was falling in, or deorbit it, and that went away. The fellow that was going to fly with me, Jack Lausma, as it turned out, did fly one of the Skylab missions. He was on the second Skylab mission, and I've seen pictures of him using the shower. I think it was effective, but I can't answer the question maybe of how often they would use the shower. I would assume not like we would do it here, where we might shower almost every day because of just a limitation of water supply. But also, if you're in a spacecraft, be it capsule or in the case of Skylab, you're not going to get very dirty. If you work a lot, of course, you could perspire. But the spacecraft are kept very clean throughout the lifetime. When I was at Grumman working on lunar modules, I had to wear a white garment and a hat. I had to wear gloves. So they were very careful not to have anything spoil or mire the spacecraft interior. So the hardware was very clean. So you wouldn't, unlike normal work you might do here on the ground, you weren't going to get very dirty to actually need a shower very often. But I think it was effective and probably was refreshing to occasionally have that capability. In the capsule, all we had, we could use wash rags. So wet a cloth and could wipe yourself down with the cloth. And of course, we had towels that one could dry oneself, but we had very limited things like back home.
Так, ну, наверное, переведу ответ, значит, поскольку задан был на русском. Но на самом деле вот непосредственно мое участие в программе Skylab, оно сводилось к тому, что наш экипаж должен был вывести разгонный блок, состыковать его со Skylab и дальше либо Skylab поднять, либо его затопить. То есть непосредственно с душем я не соприкасался. Однако с ним соприкасался мой второй пилот Джек Лусма, который участвовал во второй экспедиции на Skylab. Там у меня и были фотографии его в процессе использования этого самого душа. Ну, он говорил, что, ну, достаточно, в общем-то, эффект достигался. Вот, я не знаю, насколько часто, в общем-то, получалось у них пользоваться этим душем. Скорее всего, не настолько часто, насколько это у нас на Земле происходит, потому что дефицит воды на борту. Вот, ну, на самом деле, в общем-то, непонятно тоже, насколько, в общем-то, необходимо что-то такое делать, потому что никаких таких работ, когда можно очень как-то сильно вспотеть или очень сильно запачкаться, на борту не было. Вот. Что касается корабля, да, то тоже чистый объект. Я когда в Грумане работал с лунным модулем, я все время носил там белый комбинезон, белую шапочку, там перчатки, чтобы, не дай бог, там что-то с меня в корабле не упало. Вот. Что касается санитарно-гигиенических дел в Аполлоне, мы там пользовались всякого рода салфетками, влажными полотенцами вот, в процессе своего полета. Ну, а, значит, заключение, резюме по душу, что, наверное, в общем-то, с точки зрения психологической, приятно периодически освежиться. Вот так. Thank you very much.
Я тоже задам вопрос на русском. В первую очередь хотелось бы поблагодарить за отличную, интересную речь и спросить. Мы во время форума очень много узнали о подготовке и космонавтов, и астронавтов к полету в космос на МКС. Но хотелось бы узнать больше интересных подробностей о подготовке астронавтов именно к высадке на Луну и действиях на Луне. Спасибо.
Thank you very much for being able to talk to us. It was very interesting. And over this summer science school, we learned a lot about the training of cosmonauts and astronauts. And I am wondering if there were any particularities you can share about training of the crew for the lunar mission to land on the moon.
Okay, respect to training for lunar missions, probably the only thing I would guess, because I've not been involved with the program with our current ISS and the use of the Russian Soyuz capsule, or I've not been involved with the Russian training program earlier. I would have guessed it's pretty much the same. For the vehicle that you have to operate, there's obviously a lot of training using simulators, things that can virtually simulate and replicate all the controls and how the systems work in the spacecraft, and to go through procedures that you will use when you fly the vehicle to become very familiar with that, and also with both normal and emergency procedures, how to handle things when something doesn't quite go right. So he spent a lot of time in that regard. The only thing probably different with the lunar missions was we did do extensive lunar surface training at different places in the United States and Canada and Hawaii and Iceland. I went to, which had terrain and had volcanic type episodes that could replicate roughly terrain, not from the terrain standpoint, but represent the kind of rocks, the kind of rock formations that we might see when we were landed on the moon. Our main role as an astronaut on the moon was to survey the scene for a geologic survey and take a lot of pictures, to be very knowledgeable about understanding the type of rocks and the structures that we would see, what they call stratigraphy, to better collect samples. And as I said, very, very carefully document the samples with photography and to collect them in sample bags to come home, surveying the area where we landed. Now, from just the lunar photography that was available, the geologist had an idea of maybe what we would find, but in every case, that wasn't quite, the photography didn't have the accuracy or the definition. So most things were found to be a little different than planned. So it was good that we were trained to be a real-time field geologist. And I did, over those missions I trained for, I did 31 field geology training episodes, which would be more than I think a geologist who was a major in school in geology. That was a lot more field geology episodes they would have in getting their PhD, their doctorate in that field.
Так, ну, в общем-то, начнем с подготовки самой как таковой. Я думаю, что на самом деле она сильно не отличается от того, что было, что есть, потому что я немного участвовал и в различных вопросах, связанных с подготовкой под МКС, и в частности с подготовкой по Союзу. Вот, значит, что происходило? Ну, обычная достаточно стандартная подготовка с большим количеством занятий в тренажерах, когда изучаешь корабль. Вот, хороший был тренажер, подробный, вот, изучаешь органы управления, изучаешь системы и готовишься по всем возможным процедурам, штатным процедурам, нештатным процедурам и так далее, то есть чтобы быть готовым к любой ситуации, то есть в случае возникновения каких-то проблем, как с этими проблемами бороться. Вот, но в то же время должен отметить, что был один такой компонент подготовки, который был нетипичным и был очень интересным. Значит, это была подготовка к операциям на лунной поверхности в различных регионах Земли. Это происходило на полигонах в Соединенных Штатах, в Канаде, на Гавайях, в Исландии. То есть практически во всех таких регионах, где можно было найти участки поверхности, похожие на поверхность Луны с точки зрения того, какие породы там присутствовали, какие камни, какие образования геологические там были. И нас фактически обучали работе геолога в поле. То есть мы должны были осмотреть местность, мы должны были определить какие-то наиболее интересные геологические образования, интересные выходы пород, и потом уже, значит, вдумчиво подходить к подбору тех образцов, которые мы должны были собрать, задокументировать, уложить в мешки и упаковать, и потом аккуратненько, чтобы это все не загрязнилось по дороге, отвезти потом вместе с собой на Землю. За весь этот свой период подготовки к лунным миссиям я совершил 31 геологическую экспедицию, что, наверное, даже больше, чем у студентов, которые изучают геологию в университетах, и, наверное, был достоин уже степени доктора геологии. То есть вот такая интересная была подготовка.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Hello, I'm a student of Bauman Moscow State University, Tamayev. Well, I read of you when I was in school, and I think it's a pleasure to talking with you live. And I know about loads about you because I read books and other papers. Let me say from the bottom of my heart that you are a living legend. I know a lot about you, and talking with you was a real pleasure. So let me ask you this question. As I know, you were the first one who was piloting the shuttle Enterprise. What are your thoughts on this crazy piece of technology? It's well, that's it.
Well, interesting. I don't remember the date now. It's quite a few years ago. I was visiting the Technic Museum in Speyer, Germany, and there they have a prototype of the Buran that Russia had and actually flew an orbital flight that's very similar to space shuttle, and I would equate it to the test program they ran with Buran, quite similar to what we did with Enterprise. I'd wish to visit with the. I think there were 7 test pilots, cosmonauts, who did fly Buran, and a test program they had where they used the Buran then was equipped with 4 jet engines, aircraft type jet engines, rather than use a carrier aircraft to get to altitude and do the test program, which gave them a lot more flight time. And in the Buran during that kind of a program, there were 7 people who flew it, and I'd hoped to ask about the person who flew the first missions, both the taxi. They had a taxi test program on the runway before they actually took it off and had airborne flights. And unfortunately, he had passed away at some time earlier, and he was actually flying a jet aircraft in an air show, and lost his life. So I was hoping they had to get to speak with him at some point and discuss mutually how the handling qualities, as we call it, how well it flew, the Buran as he had flown it with the jet engines, and how I had flown Enterprise at the time. But that program was more like, rather than a space program, it was more like an aircraft test program. We ran it that way. In fact, Deke Slayton, one of the original 7 astronauts who had been in flight test himself in the Air Force, was the head of the program. And he had with him a deputy, number 2, who had also been in the aircraft test for a number of years, Ed Edwards, before in his career, and a mixed bag of people to test the spacecraft. We had some of the manufacturers' programs to go get it through Enterprise through the factory test where it had been built and get it ready to ship to Edwards, which they shipped over land down the highway to move it to Edwards Air Force Base to get ready for flight test. And we had a contingent of people from Kennedy Space Center who ultimately were going to receive the first birds, the ships. Columbia was the first one that were slated to go into orbit. Now, Enterprise didn't have all the space systems. We did not have a space environmental system, the radiation part of the systems and the payload bay doors. We didn't have any of the orbital propulsion systems, the liquid engines, or the little RCS small engines for attitude control. So it was limited in that way. We flew it more with our standard aircraft flying suits, a helmet, a visor, and an oxygen mask, much like we would if we were flying our aircraft. So, but they did get an experience with what I call some of the more complex system, and that is the primary avionics for the guidance, navigation, and control of the vehicle, which was, for the first time for us, was going to be all digital, using 4 computers that had to operate in synchronous to provide redundancy flying the vehicle. Now, we did have a 5th computer with a separate wiring string for backup control system. So it was an unusual configuration the first time NASA had gone into that. So it was thought that it was nice to have Kennedy Space Center people there who were later to inherit the orbital bird, to at least be very familiar with that part of the system, which was identical to the system that would be used to fly in orbit. So that's the way the test program was constructed. So it was kind of treated like a small program within the bigger program, where most of the people were involved back at Johnson Space Center and around the country preparing the first orbital vehicle. So we were kind of set aside by ourselves, probably total group of about 500 people that were involved in this test program. So it was you got to know most everybody. So it was a very small program in that sense. Program was highly successful. We had one problem on one flight where an APU, which were fed by hydrazine, APUs that furnished the pumps that furnished the pressure for the hydraulic system that would move all the control surfaces, could open the rudder wide, open it up like a speed brake to be a drag device, open a body flap that was like a trimming device in between the elevons that were out on the wings, and of course a basic rudder, and pressure for the brakes and tire assembly. So that had a leak in one of them and did spew some hydrazine around in the avionics section and damaged some wiring, but not, we didn't, Joe Engel and Dick Truly were flying that mission and they didn't have any control problems as a result of that. So mission itself, the short mission they flew, was not affected. I had a problem on the very last flight I flew where we were going to land on the runway and to hit at a certain spot on the runway. And I was over controlling the vehicle in terms of small inputs to try to hit the spot on the runway, and ended up saturating the control system, hydraulics, to where when I had a slight bounce off the runway, I lost control in the roll axis. I lost control briefly for a while because I was over controlling the pitch. And that resulted in what is known as a PIO, pilot induced oscillation. So it's quite embarrassing because there was obviously a group of people watching this. And we went through software mods following that to assure that you would never have if rate limiting happened to any degree, you would never completely lock out a control axis. That you might have less control, but you would always have pitch and roll and control of other things that were used in the hydraulics. So that was basically the overall program. Like I said, it was quite successful in terms of schedule. We started it in August. I think the first flight, release flight, was August 21st. So we flew it completely within that year before the program again moved off to worry about Columbia in its first flight, which did not happen to several years later.
Thank you very much for your answer. It was very interesting.
One other thing I might comment is around the book I wrote, I created a website. And for those that are interested, they might check out the website, which is www.fredhaise, in small letters, .space.
Can you repeat it, please?
Yeah, it's not .org, it's .space. It's a new domain. And I created it because the book I wrote, it was a little over 200 pages about, people complained it was too short. So the website has narrative, and each sort of segment of the website has a lot of pictures and has some archival information, digitized. In fact, it has the pilot report of that PIO I just described. It's in the website, but has a daily diary I kept while I was testing lunar modules at the plant at Grumman. His memos were written by myself and Ed Mitchell, who landed on the moon on Apollo 14, and Dave Ballard on status on lunar module testing. So has a lot of information of that sort also on the website. That probably is not of much interest to the general public, but people who are interested in space, they would find it interesting.
We will check the site later, I think. In the chat already, someone sent the link to the site, so we received it. Thank you very much.
Okay, very good. Yeah, there's also what's called brain blurbs. It's something to keep the site active. As I get getting old, and I'm approaching this November, I will be 90 years old. So I'm getting pretty old. And when you get old, it turns out as you're sitting around sometimes, something will come into your mind from 50 or 60 or 70 years ago. Some things that I did not think of to put in the book, but of maybe sort of interest to people. And so I post those occasionally on the website. Just things that have popped into my mind from a long time ago.
Wish you good health and just live long. Thank you very much.
My name is Viktor Zelentsov, Associate Professor of Bauman Moscow State Technical University. Coming back to Apollo projects, there was a movie called Apollo 13, and it was produced in late 1990s. I wonder how much it correlates to the real life.
Apollo 13, if we look over the Apollo program, I think historically what would be preserved very long range would be Apollo 8, because it constitutes the first time humans actually left the gravitational sphere of Earth and ventured out to a nearby body, the moon, which orbits the Earth. If you thinking of the universe, that's actually not going very far, or even thinking of our overall solar system. Going to the moon is not going very far. But secondly, obviously, Apollo 11, the first time any humans have landed on another body and set foot on another planet, planetary body, in this case, our moon. And those will stand up. Apollo 13 has stayed current in a way because it's kind of grown into what I would call a folk tale, a story, if you will, and it clearly was a good story of people who were in trouble, who had a challenge with a group of people, a team, to solve to get them safely home. So it's continued more in that vein. There was a Hollywood movie made about the flight, some inaccuracies in the movie, but nevertheless, I thought it did a good job of telling the story of the problem and team that worked to get us home. That carried, I thought, well in the movie. Technically, it obviously had some problems here and there, but otherwise, it's stayed on and more. And when I speak to people, Apollo 13 always comes up at least one portion of what they'd like to hear about, more because it is that kind of a folk tale to it. from the standpoint of a mission overall, it obviously was not the mission successful in the sense of the mission we had planned to do. For me as a test pilot, looking back on it, I was obviously sad, very sad at the time I did not get to land. And I frankly thought I would get another chance because I went within a month, I was back in training again as the backup commander on Apollo 16. I was backing up John Young. And with that, I was back into an alignment where I would have commanded Apollo 19, which at the time was to be the last mission on the moon. Originally, we had Apollo 20. 20 had been canceled. And I really thought I would get to fly Apollo 19 with Jerry Carr and Bill Pogue were assigned to me as a crew member. And we trained for about 4 or 5 months on 16 before that mission. Missions of 18 and 19 were canceled due to congressional budget cuts to the program. So I lost that second chance. Of course, I look back now fondly at that, just to having that opportunity I had back in that day and age, which was in a very unique program, the Apollo program, with the funding unusually provided through most of the program to accomplish what we set out to do.
Thank you very much. It was a great pleasure.
Artemis, yeah. Hello, my name is Ivan. I'm also a Bauman Moscow State Technical University, and that's a great pleasure for me to talk with you. And I'm interested in your opinion about the Artemis program. Are there any chances that it is going to be the breakthrough of our age, as the program, as the Apollo program was almost 60 years ago? Thanks for your answer.
Dear I'm afraid we cannot hear you. Please turn on your microphone. I'm afraid we cannot hear you.
Fred, you are still muted. Can you unmute yourself, please?
Галя, ты не можешь принудительно включить?
Нет, боюсь, что не могу. Fred, please, on the bottom of the window, there will be a button with the microphone. which have a red color. Can you please click on that button and you will unmute yourself?
Or you can just, on the keyboard, just press M.
Okay, now I'm on. Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes, sir.
Yes, we can. Thank you.
I don't know how that got turned off. I didn't hit anything. But at any rate, Houston, we had a problem. But I didn't hear the question. I thought it was something about Apollo 8.
It was about Artemis program, the plans to return to the moon.
Okay.
What's your idea about that, and especially assuming your experience of Apollo
Right.
program, which was 60 years ago?
Yeah, the question was about the Artemis program, which is the one now that's ongoing to support a landing back on the moon again at some point. I think the next mission that's planned in the Artemis program is to do a very similar mission to what we did on Apollo 13, except hopefully they won't have an oxygen tank problem, and to go around the moon and back to Earth on a much larger trajectory. They'll go much higher altitude behind the moon on their path before returning for entry back at Earth. The program, in a way, is a little, from a management standpoint, is a little more complicated because of the number of components involved. To me, it strikes me as a management challenge that I had because I did not mention in my aerospace career during those 17 years, one major contract that I ran in Washington, D.C. was I was head of the system engineering integration contract on development of the early space station Freedom, which has become ISS, the International Space Station, which is a joint program with several international countries, including Russia, that's ongoing today. A big challenge of that program was all these components that had to be assembled on orbit from various sources, various countries, to be delivered at different times, so they would never be joined together on Earth for checkout and testing. That would be done in Earth orbit. So we worried a lot. We worried a lot about having very accurate documentation of their interfaces, which we kept in a document called an interface control document, to make sure that when the next component was brought up, it would not just mechanically and structurally, but also mate perfectly relative to wiring connections or plumbing connections that might be for the cooling or whatever, that they would not have a problem when they got on orbit to try to hook things up. Artemis faces that very similar challenge, I should say, hopefully not problem, because they will be faced now with the same thing, that many of these components that are involved won't see each other, won't be connected or first time interface until in lunar orbit. So it's even further away from home, should they likely surface some problem that had not been accounted for within the strict control of those interfaces, or how things will hook up together. There's also, again, more players involved in terms of the companies, the same way as the space station. European Space Agency is a part, etc. And many companies, private companies. So it's SpaceX now that has grown up into the launch industry that will support the program, I think, with 2 or 3 launches, in fact, to support the first landing mission. And of course, a new booster NASA has developed that uses solid rockets, two of them which are slightly in diameter, larger than the ones used for space shuttle, and but a reuse really of a modified but slightly improved performance liquid engine that was used on the space shuttle, except there would be four engines rather than three. So it's a challenge, it's a management challenge to me to get all these things tested and checked out and to align with a schedule of deliveries and be able to support any given mission to carry out. Of course, behind the scenes in the United States for this program, as it is with any large program, is the funding support that has to pass through our Congress in a process, the government, every year to assure you get the funding that's requested, which was quite a chore I found when I was in the work on our International Space Station in the early years to get the funding, continued support every year to try to keep the program on schedule. So that's a challenge, though, for any major program with a large expenditures required by the government. And I assume that's similar, although the system may be different on how you get the money, similar in Russia.
Yeah, thanks for your answer. Yeah, that's all.
Do we have any questions from the online participants?
No, we haven't so far.
So, hello, my name is Gleb Sorokin. I'm from BMSU too. So, just a little small question for you, a bit funny one. So, did you have your own Corvette at the time of Apollo program? So, and if you had, did you like it?
I'm sorry, did I have what in the Apollo program? I'm sorry.
Did you have a Chevrolet Corvette car? A car, Corvette, like
A Coke?
Sports car.
I didn't get that word. Did I have a
The Corvette?
Corvette? Oh, Corvette, your car, automobile. Oh, no, I did not. There was a deal offered by Chevrolet that really got tied in by the original 7 because they got to be friends with a fellow who had a dealership in Florida that was actually a race car driver, as an aside, the dealership owner. And that's how they got started, that the original 7 who wanted them got these cars at a very lower price for up to a year or more. And eventually they were allowed to purchase them. Being used, they got them at a lower rate, lower cost. I had for one time that program sort of faded out as more and more astronauts got into the program, but they still had that offer when my group joined the program, and I did not choose a Corvette. I was married, and at the time had 2 children. So I asked and got the same sort of arrangement for a station wagon, which was a lot more practical for having a family. And so that's the car I got rather than a Corvette. So I ended up buying the car after the agreement was for a certain time, like I said, a year or more. So I ended up buying the car, and it became my family car.
Thank you. we still have station wagons in Russia.
So unless we've got more questions, I believe we can consider ourselves done for tonight. Mr. Haise, it was a great pleasure to be able to talk to you tonight, to hear your story, to hear your opinion about the past and present and future of the human space exploration and about the lunar program, and some personal insights such as Corvette cars as well. So thank you very much for the time you devoted to us, and I believe the students learned a lot tonight and had that wonderful experience. Thank you very much, and I believe Victoria will say something as well.
Well, I just wanted to enjoyed the questions, and I wish the best to all of you who I assume are studying in hopes of staying in aerospace. Hopefully, some of you will have the experience of working more into the exploration part of the business that will continue both in both our countries and elsewhere in the world, which is I'll say the common thing for the human race to figure out all about why we're here and about the universe in general, and generally, as I've found it, exciting because you're always going to be working on the front of things, figuring out new things, new challenges. So it makes for a more excitement in the career and some good feeling of satisfaction, of contribution to the advancement of knowledge about the human race and how we might survive ultimately here on Earth. I wish you all well. Good luck.
Спасибо, мистер Хейс.
Thank you very much, Mr. Haise.
Большое спасибо. Такие встречи ребят вдохновляют на новые проекты, на удачные решения, на движение вперед. Спасибо вам большое.
So, and those meetings are really inspiring for the young students to make the progress, to learn something new, to create something new. Thank you very much.
That's
We wish you all the best.
all right. Happy to join you, and I'm glad everything technically worked out right. We didn't have an oxygen tank explode on us today, so we were good.
All right, so let's applause once again.
Okay. And here's my best friend.
Thank you.
All right. Goodbye, all. Goodbye.